not long until this crucial vote. It looks as if Theresa May will lose it. So what's plan B?
Well, let's cross that bridge when and if it happens. Right now, her focus, my focus, the government's focus is on convincing people that actually this is the best thing to do. It's the right option. It's the most likely to deliver Brexit. And we want to convince colleagues that it's the right thing to do to back it.
I understand that you want to focus on the vote ahead, but people are quite worried. I mean, I spent the week in Harlow, for example, where people are really concerned about what happens next if the deal falters. So let's make a deal. You don't have to tell me what plan B is, but you have got one, right?
Well, look, the important thing right now is to convince people otherwise. I mean, I'm not going to get into, will we do this, will we do that, will we do the other? The important thing is to say to fellow MPs, those concerns are out there, and there's big concerns. Are we going to leave? Are we going to deliver Brexit? Are we going to somehow try and reverse Brexit? Is Parliament going to force us to reverse Brexit? What we have is, I think, a sensible compromise deal. It's not giving everybody everything they want, but it was never going to. This was a 52-48 result.
Have you got everything you want?
Of course not. And indeed, I think most people, the Prime Minister herself has said, this is not the perfect deal. But if you'd offered me this deal back in 2016, at the time of the referendum, and you said, instead of staying in the European Union, you can have this, I'd have said, thank you very much.
At the same time, though, I understand you don't want to get into the details, but if you don't say what your plan B is, or at least give the implication that you have a plan B, then other people will step into that gap. And the Sunday papers are absolutely full of MPs from different parties coming up with their own plan Bs, stepping into the void that's been left by your government.
Well, I don't think it is a void at all. The government's coming forward with a proposal to the nation, a proposal to Parliament that says this is what we think is the best compromise deal that enables us to leave us good friends, good neighbours, on good terms with the European Union, carry on trading with the European Union, and at the same time get the benefits of Brexit, being able to forge our own trade policies, to leave the single market legislation, to leave the customs union, to leave the common agricultural policy, to leave the common fisheries policy. What we campaigned for in 2016 was not to become an inward-focused nation, not to walk away from international friendships, but was to stay good friends and neighbours, to be a globally focused country, but actually take back control of our laws and our finances. And I think that this deal achieves that, but it does so in a way that recognises the fact the nation is pretty divided on this issue.
I mean, more than half of MPs have publicly said that they are not going to be backing the deal, so the prospect of no deal becomes very real. You, of course, have been very involved in some of that no-deal planning as Transport Secretary. I just want to really talk for a while about how that no-deal planning is going. Because, for example, you've employed a company called Seaborne Freight to provide some extra ferry routes. It's now emerged that they don't have any ships, and actually they won't be ready until a month after we've left. I mean, that's not going to inspire confidence in people, is it?
Well, what I've done is I've hired two very well-established ferry companies, DFDS and Brittany Ferries, to supply an element of extra capacity across the Channel in a no-deal scenario. First and foremost, our goal and my prime priority in a no-deal scenario is to keep the conventional routes through Dover and Calais and through the Channel Tunnel moving smoothly. I've had conversations with my French counterpart, we've had political discussions with the French, we've had official discussions with the French, and everyone is committed to keeping things flowing as smoothly as possible.
Yeah, but if
the additional capacity,
that doesn't mean that it will be.
But that's why we're putting in place some extra capacity to take some of the pressure off the system. Now, we had a smaller third business that came along and said, we can do something for you too, a very small proportion of what we need. We have given them the opportunity to do that. They don't get paid unless they deliver the service. But I'm not in the business of saying to a new British company, you can't take part. What I'm in the business of doing is saying is if you want to take part, you have to prove you can deliver, and we're not going to pay you until you do.
Another thing that perhaps isn't going to be inspiring huge amounts of confidence is the traffic jam that was organised, in which 150 lorries were hoped to turn up and actually only 89 actually arrived. I mean, we can't even organise a traffic jam. It's a bit embarrassing, isn't it?
Well, no, because that wasn't the purpose of the exercise. It's great to grab these headlines and say, oh, it didn't work. Actually, what we were doing was tracking the flows of lorries in and out of Manston Airfield and further down on the A256, actually in groups of 25, so you could see how quickly lorries could move into and out of the site. People tend to look at something, form their own impressions, and reach a conclusion over what's happening. Actually, the trial worked fine, and if you are bringing in lorries on the day, and some of them will get late work to do, you invite in more than you need to get the job done, and that's what we did.
Have you been in touch with the Ministry of Defence about some of your no-deal planning?
I've talked to Gavin Williamson about no-deal planning quite regularly, yes.
What about?
Well, when we discuss as cabinet colleagues what we would do in no-deal planning terms. I mean, I don't have the military actively involved in no-deal planning beyond the secondment of a small number of staff from the Ministry of Defence, as is happening across Whitehall. I mean, our focus in no-deal planning has been to make sure we have all the aviation agreements we need in place, making sure that we take into account the possibility of disruption in Kent. I do not want a repeat of what happened in 2015 when the whole of Kent was ground to a halt by troubles in the Channel ports, making sure that we have some alternative capacity in place if it's needed. But first and foremost, working with the French, working with people at Eurotunnel, working with people at Dover and Calais to make sure that we keep the trade flowing smoothly. Everybody wants that to happen.
But the army is on standby. The military is ready to help if it looks like there will be major disruption.
Well, no, I have not asked for military support for the operations in Kent. That will be handled by Highways England and by Kent Police. OK. Now,
yesterday, you said that the far right could benefit if Brexit isn't pushed through. And I just want to have a little look at some of those comments that you did make, because you said that if MPs don't back Theresa May's deal, we risk a break with the British tradition of moderate mainstream politics that goes back to the Restoration in 1660. What did you mean? Well, I think you're putting into quotes things I didn't actually say as a quote, but what I actually meant was that if we do that was a quote in the Mail. Were you misquoted then?
No, I think that was a quote outside question marks. I don't recall mentioning the Restoration. What I said is we will lose a tradition.
My understanding is that was in quotation marks.
But, OK, let me explain. My concern is that we will have, in the aftermath of a decision not to go ahead with Brexit, if we do not fulfil the terms of that referendum, what we will have is the arrival in this country of the kind of populist politics on the extremes that we're seeing in most other European countries. We have always in this country, and this is where the point is absolutely right, we have always had, I think, a sensible political mainstream that has dealt with issues in a mature way throughout the decades. But what we haven't seen in this country is the appearance of political extremism in the way that we have seen in some other countries over the years. I do not want that, the emergence of the populist parties that we're seeing in most other European countries now, in this country, because we've turned around to the people, to the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, and simply said to them, well, guys, sorry, we're not leaving after all. So just to be clear, because in the Mail on Sunday, on the Mail interview, they were saying that you're talking about the breaking with the tradition of politics that goes back to the Restoration in 1660. And I think what some people are thinking is, hang on, there's been a lot of pretty bad things that have happened since 1660. Wars, executions, millions of people not being able to vote at all. They were the good old days? No, I did not specifically mention the date 1660. What I said is that I'm concerned that we will see now the kind of populist politics in this country that we've previously seen emerge in other European countries, and I do not want that to happen. OK. Now, I just want to talk about your own record, because you've been Transport Secretary now for 2.5 years. Train punctuality is at a 13-year low, but fares keep rising. More than 3,000 bus routes reduced or scrapped since 2010. Is it a record that you're proud of, and do you think things are better now? Well, I think what we're dealing with on the railways is continually expanded demand for services. Our rail network is absolutely full. We are putting a huge amount of money into the rail network, £47 billion over the next 5 years, opening new services around the country, starting new routes, replacing old trains with new ones. Every single train in the north of England is being replaced with a brand new or a completely refurbished train over the coming months. We've got new express trains on the East Coast Main Line, on the Great Western Main Line, on the Transpennine route coming later this year. A huge amount of investment taking place around the country. Some of that investment has been delayed, frustratingly. So what happened with Northern Rail last summer, because of the delay to the electrification of the line from Blackpool to Manchester, that was an investment programme that we were putting in, the government funding, which was delayed and caused knock-on effects to the timetable. But the reason we are spending this money is because we recognise that the rail system is hugely congested, and what we're trying to do is to ease the pressure, increase capacity, give people a better travelling experience. I can't help but thinking that if you are one of these rail passengers, you know, we've been to Wigan with the show, for example, and spoken to some of these people who've been, you know, their lives really put under great strain because of the delays, not being able to get back to put their kids to bed, struggling to get to interviews and to jobs because they just can't rely on the transport system. And
the answer is just not going to be good enough, is it?
Well, no, so of course it's not good enough. This is why we're replacing all the trains for those people with brand new trains, with more seats, with more capacity. And the frustration last summer was the problems were caused by an electrification project that went wrong, that was delayed. This was government investment that was delayed. It wasn't government not putting in money, it was government investing money and a delay to the project, which meant there was a knock-on effect. The electric trains couldn't be used, and therefore there was a shortage of rolling stock. It was hugely frustrating. It's why we made sure that passengers will receive compensation for what happened. The service is now running better. It's not perfect, there's a way to go yet, but the service is running better and more reliably now, but it's not nearly good enough yet. And that's why I think the new trains coming across the north over the next few months will make a real difference.
We didn't mention bus routes there, which I did in my original question. And I can't help but thinking, again, bus routes are something that people don't give enough attention to in Westminster, and yet, disproportionately people on lower incomes tend to use buses, people outside of the South East. I mean, do you use the bus?
I do. Occasionally I use the train most of the day. I catch the train most days. I only use the bus from time to time. But this is one reason why we've given franchising powers back to mayoral authorities in recognition that it may be necessary for them to plan a significantly integrated network, better services, and actually in places where local authorities are really working with the private operators to deliver better services, like Cornwall, for example, you're seeing a rise in ridership, you're seeing a rise in revenues and a better service for passengers. So it can be done.
I just want to talk about drones as well before we leave, because I have to say it's been pretty embarrassing, hasn't it? Two of our major airports temporarily shut down because of drones, and there's been a lot of questions about why this wasn't recognised sooner as an issue.
Well, a simple answer is that in the case of Gatwick, what happened there was a unique situation that's not happened anywhere else in the world. Heathrow was different. Heathrow was a drone that appeared and disappeared.
A unique situation that some people were predicting.
Gatwick was a deliberate disruptive attack. The systems do not exist to completely tackle a problem like this. We were able to bring in some military equipment that helped ease the situation. Gatwick is now looking to put together a new set of systems that can tackle the problem. But we've had airports from all around the world come to us since this happened and said, we're not sure how we would cope. How did you cope? This is a new area. The technology is very immature. There's a lot of effort now going into this from airports around the UK. We're working with them to try and find the right solutions. But there wasn't a simple off-the-shelf solution that should have been in place that wasn't in place.
It feels as if you've been sort of trailed, shall we say, with misfortune in the Department of Transport with the drones. Before that, in the Ministry of Justice, with very controversial cuts to legal aid, with issues with the probation service. Why do you think it is that this kind of misfortune seems to follow you?
Well, it's a challenging time for all of us in government. We have to deliver change. We have to tackle new issues, like the drones, for example. So it's a question of getting on with the job and tackling the problems as best you can. But at the end of the day, dealing with your financial positions and also dealing with particular challenges like the expanding demand on the railways, you've just got to get on with the job and do your best.
OK, thank you very much.
You're welcome.